about the benefits of the Iran nuclear deal, and yeah, the way you've described those benefits hasn't changed. But when we talk about how this was portrayed, do you see that we wouldn't even be having this conversation still if some of the details that have come out over the last few weeks had been put out there as they were put out there back in January? And I'm still not clear on why these details weren't put out then. Because it seems like, you know, if the administration had said, yeah, there were $400 million in cash on a plane at the same time. Here's why it came out at the same time. Here's when it was paid. It wasn't paid before. It was paid exactly after. Here's why. And had you used the word leverage then, I mean, that's why we're having this conversation. So can you be more clear on why those details weren't put out there in the same way now? Because I think it appears to a lot of people, and not just right-wingers as you describe, that this detail is only being brought out because of details that came out in the press.
I guess the point that I would make, though, Michelle, is simply that the details that you have referred to, while potentially interesting to some, don't change the facts. They don't change the benefits. They don't change the goals that President Obama discussed when he announced this series of agreements back in January.
Surely you would rather not be having this conversation repeatedly. I mean, both you seem annoyed by it. When the president was asked about it, he seemed annoyed that it was even coming up, almost as if you don't understand why it's coming up. So we're laying out exactly why it's coming up.
Look, I'm happy to spend all the time that you would like talking about the details of the Iran agreement. I think that we're quite proud of all of the benefits that we've enjoyed because of the president's tough principled diplomacy. So the fact that we're talking about it 7 months later, I actually think I'm happy to do. We've got a strong case to make about what it is that we've done.
But the question is why, I mean, as I said, we probably wouldn't be having this conversation if the word leverage was used and described as it was back then. If the timing and more of the details surrounding the timing was described better then. So why not?
Well, I quibble with you a little on the timing thing because the president made clear, the president himself announced this agreement within hours of it being completed and indicated exactly what the terms of these series of agreements would be. So back then, back in mid-January, all of you knew that there were two agreements that were completed roughly around the same time that would secure the release of unjustly detained Americans in Iran in exchange for the release of individuals who are being detained here in the United States. And you knew that that was taking place around the same time, within the same day, as the resolution of a financial settlement that potentially saved American taxpayers billions of dollars. So I don't think I'm willing to accept the premise of your question about the timing because I think you were working that Sunday in January and were aware that this stuff was happening at the same time.
I think the details, though, put more interest on how unusual it was. So
well, let me quibble with you on that, and I'll be quick here so you can get back to your question. But this is the thing: my colleagues at the State Department have indicated that there's actually not anything particularly unusual about the mechanism for this transaction. That these kinds of transactions between central banks are, I don't know if they're common, but they're not unusual, at least in terms of the movement of currency. And again, the reason why, I know that some Republicans have made irresponsible and kind of outlandish comments about these like 500 euro notes being part of the transfer. The reason that paper currency was used to make the transfer is because there's no banking relationship between the United States and Iran. Right. So it's because of our commitment to ensuring the isolation of Iran that the transaction was carried out in this way. So again, there are other people who are much better experts on the way these kinds of transactions have taken place in the past, but my understanding is that this is not particularly unusual.
To avoid the scrutiny that's come out now twice since January, wouldn't it have been better to lay out the details that you've now since laid out back then, and why didn't you, including the use of the word leverage?
Well, again, the president spoke publicly on live national television laying out the terms of this agreement. And there were any number of conversations that all of you had on the record and on background with senior administration officials describing what had happened. What I think is, here's the other thing that I would...
We've never heard the word good leverage until
But-
a few days ago.
But there are so many details that were included in what were extraordinarily complex agreements, that all of the questions that all of you were raising back in that, on the long holiday weekend in January, were questions about how the Iran nuclear program was going to be monitored, what specific steps, and how we knew what steps Iran was going to take to roll back key aspects of their nuclear program. All of you were asking about the condition of the U.S. citizens that were being unjustly detained and what exactly were the mechanisms for returning them to the United States. Those were all good questions, all of which were answered. So
The fact that the money needed to be, or that it was seen as available to be used as leverage to make sure that the prisoners were returned. Why was that never described then, until just a few days ago?
Well, again, Michelle, I can't go back through all of the questions that all of you have asked, but again, the president was very clear about what exactly had been agreed to. And, I did briefings subsequent to the president's announcement and was quite clear about what exactly had been agreed to. And we spent a lot of time talking about the significant benefits that the United States enjoyed as a result of this tough diplomacy.
Okay, and Russia having used Iranian air bases, or at least one Iranian air base, and now stopping it, what's the administration's reaction to that? And how does that affect the potential of working with Russia against al-Nusra down the road?
Yeah. Well, I did note that there was a statement from a senior Iranian official indicating that the Russian use of Iranian military facilities was not likely to, or had at least stopped for now.